I'd just like to acknowledge country, pay my respects to our elders past and present, acknowledge the leader of the Gumatj people, Gullarwa Yunupingu, and thank them for providing us this opportunity to present here today and provide you with an update on empowered communities. I'd also like to acknowledge our EC regions that are all sitting in the front here with us today. They've come from 8 regions right around the country, and we thank you for your attendance and your participation at this event. And I'd like to acknowledge our EC leaders up the front here today. My name is Sean Gordon. I'm the CEO of Darkinjung Land Council on the Central Coast, and we've been a part of the Empowered Communities Initiative since June last year. My role today is, as well as being the MC, is to introduce each of our leaders and allow each of them to talk about their own experiences with empowered communities and how empowered communities is affecting change within their regions and right across the country. As I start today's presentation, I'd like to talk to you about how this experience come about. And I'm not sure of those who were at Garma last year, but you would remember that we launched Empowered Communities at this event. And we launched it with a purpose of gaining bipartisan support, which at that time we were going through an election. We were fortunate enough on the day that we had the former Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Jenny Macklin, signed the document here on the day, and we further launched in Sydney, where the current Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, then signed the Empowered Communities Initiative. And for that, I guess, was the start of a journey that started in June last year, where 8 leaders come together across the country to fight to change the current dysfunction and disadvantage that exists within our communities. And in those 8 leaders coming together, we set out with one purpose, and that was to gain bipartisan support. We did that, and then in getting the current Prime Minister's signature on that document, when he was elected, he then committed to support the ongoing journey of empowered communities. What I want to give my fellow leaders credit for in those 8 regions is in driving this initiative, it was 100% driven and resourced by them. Their passion, dedication and determination to create this vehicle, to create this model, was really driven by the experiences that they have in their communities. What is unique about this model in comparison to a lot of things that have been done in the past is that our empowered communities is not sector specific. We're not sitting here talking about health, education, housing, employment. We're sitting here talking about communities. And how do we ensure that communities and the work that we do are able to take responsibility in regards to addressing their own circumstances? To do this, we required these 8 regions to be able to commit to a set of principles. And in committing to those principles, you're committing to the values of what empowered communities is and what needs to happen in regards to driving this reform. And not just driving the reform, but living to the reform, living to the change that needs to happen within your community, and leading by example, and accepting that things will need to change if we're going to move forward. Those principles you can see up the front here on our display boards, but I'll read them out to you just so that we reinforce what they are. The first principle is Indigenous-led responsibility is at the heart of our principles on Indigenous reform. It is non-negotiable and assumed in all the principles listed below. The second principle, community and government programs must support Indigenous-led responsibility. Participation in our reform is on an opt-in basis for those eager to shape their own destinies. We are not forcing anyone to be a part of this movement. If you're genuine about changing your circumstance and addressing the issues within your community, you then need to opt in, and you then need to agree to the principles as stated. All program design must be site-specific to allow for different laws, cultures, governance and ways of making things happen. And this point is absolutely critical. For the one thing that I've learnt, having the honour to convene this group for the last 15 months, is these communities aren't the same. Yes, we're experiencing the same issues, the same disadvantage, the same dysfunctions, but the way in which we do our business is very different. The way in which we engage with our communities is very different. And that just tells me that a one-size-fits-all model in communities doesn't work. And we are driving to create change that recognises the uniqueness of these communities and ensuring that whatever is developed at that high level is able to recognise the individuality and the uniqueness of each of these regions. The fifth principle is innovation in program design is critical and will always be encouraged. While mistakes are acceptable, we will apply what we learn each time to continually improve. And that's been an integral part of this 15-month journey, is that we've continually learnt from our mistakes, and we've looked at ways of improving those, and not just improving them, but putting them in practice to ensure that those mistakes don't occur again. Funding for programs must be based on outcomes, with communities given the flexibility to innovate and do things better, and incentives used to change behaviours. And that's really changing the norms, that if communities and organisations are not delivering, they are not achieving the outcomes, then communities need to have a right to be able to say, we want those funds shifted. If specific funding is pushed down from a federal level that isn't addressing it isn't specific to that community, then it's community being able to have a right to say, these are the issues within our community and we want the funding to address these specific issues. Program outcomes must always be measured in the same ways every time, so we can improve how they are designed, put in place, and to be more efficient and effective. So those are the principles that Empowered Communities has signed up to. But just to demonstrate this process over the last 15 months, I'll go back to talk a little bit about my experience in regards to this process. Dark and Jung Land Council on the Central Coast are what we call a backbone organisation. And being a backbone organisation, we are practising all the principles of good, solid governance, transparency, accountability, making sure that we represent all the interests of Aboriginal people within our community. It is those principles and those practices that is going to drive change within our community. But it's also making sure that we take a fundamental role in leadership and ensuring that if you're receiving $1 of public money, of government money to deliver services, then we want to know about it. Not do we just want to know about it, we want to know that you're delivering on the outcomes, and if you're not delivering on the outcomes, why you're not delivering on the outcomes. And if you can't deliver on the outcomes, then we want those funds transferred to another organisation who can deliver on the outcomes. That's not just Aboriginal organisations, that's non-Aboriginal organisations, that's government service providers, that's everyone who receives funding for Indigenous specific purposes. And that is the change that we believe needs to happen to shift this gap that exists within our communities. I just, coming up on the stage, Jawa had just indicated that he had to take off. But this morning he said something very touching and absolutely hit a spot for myself. And I pass this and send this message on to the Minister. That Aboriginal disadvantage isn't significant just to remote communities. Aboriginal disadvantage exists right around the country. Whether you're in the heart of Sydney, whether you're sitting on the Central Coast, whether you're in Western New South Wales, remote Queensland, or whether you're sitting in remote communities. We have to get away from this process of tarring Aboriginal people as remote, rural and urban. because at the end of the day, these are black issues and these are issues that impact and affect our people. If we don't do this, we will end up in a cycle where in time we will need to come back to those communities that we've neglected and stayed away from, and we will have to pump significant resources in bringing them up to speed. So we need to come up with solutions that recognise all of our people right across the country and strategies that bring us along together. Because one of the critical things that come out this morning from Jawa's speech, and one of the things that we are practising within empowered communities, is that we are standing side by side. We're not standing in front of each other or behind each other. These empowered communities regions are standing side by side, and we are walking through this together. The genuine partnership that has taken place over this journey has been absolutely mind-blowing from my experience. To be a part of this and to see organisations within regions come together that hadn't had any real relationship or communication with each other, is absolutely phenomenal. I equate empowered communities to a movement. And I equate it to a movement that's not based on that you will get additional funding. It's not based on that your community is going to get prioritised in some future government plan. It's based on you and your community wanting to address the disadvantage, the dysfunction and the poverty that exists within our communities. There is no promise of anything for any of these participating regions. We are doing this because we see there is a need for change and there is a need to drive change. And if we as Aboriginal people, we don't take this responsibility on, then we can sit there and continue to blame everyone else for it. I look to my brother to the side here, and he says it's our right to take responsibility. As Aboriginal people, we must take that right. If you relinquish that right, then you sit there and you accept all the things that come with it. But we as 8 regions, we have accepted to take that responsibility, and we are driving that change throughout our process. The people sitting up here today, I'm absolutely in awe of. The involvement with them and the engagement with them right across the country. And I call this cross-country collaboration. The cross-country collaboration, the sharing of knowledge, the sharing of ideas, the sharing of resources is absolutely phenomenal. People are ringing each other, whether you're in the Kimberley and you're on the Central Coast, you're in the Cape, or you're down at Goulburn Murray, or you're in inner Sydney. We're speaking to each other, we're having the conversations, we're asking as to what's working in your community and can it work in our community. We have communities talking about reform and actually using the word reform. This was never heard of. The only person the 2 people I heard talk about reform was Noel and Marcia publicly coming out and talking about reform. But these communities are now talking about reform and talking about the need to change. What's more important is the collaboration that's existing within our organisations, and we look at the bodies that set up these organisations, or the responsibility for the governance within these organisations, such as ORIC and ASIC. These organisations aren't doing enough. Through empowered communities alone, these regions and organisations are now starting to put governance structures in place to challenge other organisations that aren't practising good governance, that aren't practising good leadership, that aren't committed and demonstrated to address the issues of our communities. Through peer pressure, through sitting at the table and having the discussion, and through understanding the issues that we have to address within our communities, we're now having organisations challenging each other as to what they need to be doing to get up to speed. That if you want to sign up to these principles, you then need to not just sign up to them, you need to start practising them.